how do you think this shakes out in the long run? Is this the end of competitive Pokemon as we know it? Is this the beginning of a bright new age?
It's the end of the Pokemon as we know it, and Will feels fine.
Good time zone internet. Hello and welcome to Design Club Live, the only game design talk show whose IVs are perfect and nature is jolly. I am your humble Design Club host, Will, joined as always by my pal, Geoff. Say hi to the people, Geoff.
Hi to the people, Geoff. Hey, everybody. I am Geoffrey Zatkin. I'm the studio director of Extra Credits and game designer in residence, coming at you from the West Coast and joined by my East Coast buddy, Will, over this way.
Hi, everyone. I'm Will. I'm the voice of the people here on the Twitch channel and our streaming overlord. If it's live and EC does it, I probably do something with it. Today, Geoff, we're going to be talking about a controversy. Bum, bum.
I like controversy.
Yeah, right?
Oh, right.
We're gonna
bum.
Exactly. We're gonna try and do a very brief rundown of a recent controversy in competitive Pokemon, and we're gonna talk a little bit about why we think that controversy happened. So first,
Well, I am going to need your help on this because I know almost nothing about Pokemon or competitive Pokemon, though I am familiar with like the competitive scene on a lot of different games. So
sure,
I need you to bring me up to speed because I would say I know nothing Jon Snow, but I know nothing.
Okay, great, excellent. First off, let's start with the basics. Pokemon is a series of video games that have been on Nintendo platforms for the past many years. I played Blue when I was in grade school. It's developed by Game Freak and published on Nintendo systems and owned in part
exclusively.
Exclusively on Nintendo systems with one major exception, Pokemon Go, which won't figure into this, but does bear mentioning. And it's owned by Game Freak, the Pokemon Company, and Nintendo. And Pokemon
jointly.
Jointly. But when we talk about this, we're going to say Nintendo or Pokemon or Game Freak, whatever works conversationally. But we really mean the entities in charge of regulating competitive Pokemon and developing the game. So when we do that, that's what we mean. So
it's easier than listing all the names.
Right, exactly. And
so this is specifically the digital version, not the collectible card game.
Not the collectible card game, not Pokemon Go. This is what's called VGC competitive Pokemon.
Hit me.
So Pokemon is a game where you collect monsters and you battle them against each other in teams of up to 6 in one of several formats in order to prove that you are, in fact, the very best that no one ever was. This takes a variety of formats. The current format is doubles with a restricted list and a whole bunch of other stuff. The interesting thing is that competitive Pokemon is it's very combinatoric. It's very exponential. There's a heavy metagame element. People train extensively. There's a big competitive scene. There are worlds and qualifiers, and people haul their Switches all over the world to do this.
So what kind of game is it? Let me actually back up.
It's a turn-based RPG monster battler.
And is the main game the same as the PvP version?
Kind of. You fight NPC trainers as part of the main game, and you also collect wild Pokemon and sometimes get Pokemon from particular events or raids or other PvE encounters. But the PvP is a stepped up player versus player version of the player versus NPC segment of the game. The NPCs in the game are, generally speaking, not very good at all compared to how good another person would be.
It's interesting. Like, I'm not used to hearing an RPG battler. Is the RPG part of that, or is it break more down into more kind of like a Clash Royale or a Hearthstone or a Magic the Gathering? Like, what would it feel more similar to for someone who hasn't played?
I think it feels, I'm going to upset a whole bunch of people all at once. Are you ready? It's a turn-based MOBA.
Okay.
In a lot of ways. Each Pokemon on your team has specific roles. it's sometimes they'll occupy the similar roles, and depending on the format. So, for instance, doubles, which is the current competitive format, involves having some amount of support for a Pokemon that's going to do a lot of your damage or sweep a lot.
Okay. I don't need deeper. I was just kind of curious on like the gameplay. So you said basically it is more similar to a turn-based MOBA than most other things.
I would say that's correct.
Because it cuts out part of the single-player gameplay when it focuses on the competitive part.
Kind of, because in order to bring a team to the PvP competitive event, you have to acquire all of the Pokemon. And the way that you do that is in the PvE section of the game. Or at least that's how the Pokemon company thinks you. So,
interesting. And let's come back to that later, but okay.
Right. So let's talk about building a team real quick.
Okay.
So there is no comprehensive way in the game to see what all of the possible Pokemon are and to build a team before you actually own all those Pokemon. So for top-end competitive, there's a lot of theory crafting that happens, none of which happens in the Pokemon game. There are various tools that people use to craft a Pokemon game because it gets extremely, extremely granular. So there are several parts of Pokemon that go under the hood and go unexplained for most of, if not all of the game, depending on which generation you're playing. So I'm going to run through them real quick, and we're going to stipulate that they're all important, but people need to take them into account when they're building a team. So there are IVs and EVs, which are, and again, Pokemon nerds, there's so much more to it than this, but I'm going to shorthand it because it's not terribly important exactly what they do, are both hidden stats. They're the roots of your core stats that determine how effective you are in combat, and they're randomized per Pokemon when you catch it.
It's like a hidden seed that tells you how good it will turn into?
The IVs are, yes. The EVs are effort values you earn with that Pokemon either by using it in combat or by using specific items on that Pokemon.
So, as a quick question then for somebody, say I'm bringing a Pikachu.
Yep.
Theoretically, the Pikachu I bring could be better or worse than the Pikachu you bring. Yes. It isn't like in a lot of other games where it's like, I'm putting down 5 barbarians in Clash Royale, or
correct.
I'm playing Darius in League of Legends, where I know what a Darius is, or what a barbarian is.
That's correct.
It's a Pokemon may have a variance in it when I'm playing against it.
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
Right.
So, how big of a variance?
Not overwhelming, but significant enough to be relevant, especially because there are certain calculators that will tell you what the breakpoints are. So because a lot of Pokemon relies on breakpoint math, the math of the difference between I can knock out an opposing Pokemon in 1 move or in 2 moves or in 3 moves is massive. Exactly what it is.
Actually, real quick game design thing for people who aren't familiar with breakpoints.
Yeah.
Let's go back to that. Say you're fighting an NPC that has 20 hit points, and you have a sword-wielding guy with a 10 hit point damage attack. Yep. You know it's going to take 2 hits to kill that NPC. So if you upped your damage from 10 to 11 or 10 to 12, you're not actually doing much. Whether you do 11 and then 22 damage or 10 and 20 damage, it still takes you 2 hits to knock it down. That's your breakpoint.
Yes.
If for some reason whatever you're playing had its damage reduced by a point from, say, some sort of supporting thing defending it, so you're only doing 9 points of damage,
huge.
Suddenly it takes you 3 hits to knock this out.
Right.
1 whole extra round of combat or however else it works. And so what we're kind of looking at is the breakpoints here. The same, like if you're doing 10 damage and the opponent has 20 hit points and you can cast a buff on the opponent that gives it 1 extra hit point. Massive. That's actually massive because it means it takes a 3rd attack to knock it down.
Right.
And a lot of competitive games balance against how the breakpoints fall.
Yes.
And how you can manipulate them to knock things down quicker or make your things stay up longer.
Exactly. So in addition to EVs and IVs, there's also a nature, which is the Pokemon's personality, sort of summed up. And that also has a statistical effect. So when you choose a Pokemon, You're not just choosing Pikachu. You want a Pikachu with specific statistics, its EVs and IVs, and a specific nature to occupy a specific role in the team. And all that's theory crafted outside of the game because it's very time consuming to get the resources to get exactly the right Pikachu.
I would expect it's mildly frustrating that if you're really like, you just keep, equivalently, you're hunting Pokemon over and over and over to try and find basically the rare drops.
Yes, exactly. So, and again, massively oversimplifying. There are items that can help or shorten or speed up, but there is still an investment of time once you have created the theory crafted version. And there are many websites that do this. Some of them are more well used than others, but the field of Pokemon theory crafting is very large, and that's normally done outside of the game because once you start getting into getting those Pokemon, it becomes a very grindy process. So the team is theory crafted, and then you go and get the team. There are several options for this. One, you can have your buddy do it. This is actually pretty common. People will like, hey, you really like grinding Pokemon games. Could you get me this exact team? And you'll send them a team on this calculator that has exactly what you need. And they'll help you put together the team.
So instead of gold farmers is equivalently Pokemon farmers. So people looking to do, okay.
Yep.
So you can get it yourself. You can hire somebody to do it or get a buddy to do it, but you need to collect so basically what we're getting at is they're tradable.
Correct. Yeah, they are tradable. And that'll come up in a little bit. So, but whoever's doing it, the official way to get this is to go out into the wild and catch the Pokemon. And then there are a variety of calculators, third-party calculators that can tell you whether or not you got the thing that's correct. Whether you got something with the right IVs and EVs, because it can be a little hard to tell. And
so something that exposes the hidden stats.
Correct.
Cool.
And cool. So that's if, big caveat, that's if it's in the current generation and it's not a legendary. Geoff, would you believe that because Pokemon is a game that has many different games in its series, that some Pokemon from previous games are still very relevant to the current competitive game?
Can you transfer them from game to game?
You can indeed, Geoff. You can transfer them through... Yeah, that's correct. You can transfer them through a program called Pokemon Home or Pokemon Bank, which is very old, and now you can't get anymore because the 3D eShops shut down. So, like, that's a whole other problem. But you can... If I have a copy of Sword and Shield, which is the last generation of main phase Pokemon games, and I want to transfer a key legendary Pokemon from that game to my copy of Scarlet and Violet and use it to beat people's face in, I can do that. But there's a big but. That means I have to have that game, and I can only get one copy of that legendary per playthrough. And several of the legendaries, particularly in Sword and Shield, I have personal beefs with this, force you to make irreversible decisions about what legendaries you can get. So the time investment's quite high if you want multiple different competing legendaries for different reasons. In addition, the whole checking for the correct stat thing is much more time consuming on a legendary because it's harder to check those stats. Because when you catch a legendary, you have to catch the legendary, check its stats.
Actually, I think we're getting a bit deep here.
Yeah.
It takes straight up. These things can be very hard to get, but there's some legacy ones. So equivalently, this is sounding more and more like it could be a pay-to-win game, where because certain people could throw large amounts of money to pick up obscure and rare things.
Yes, and I really want to impress this because this is key to what we're getting to. This is the point that I'm getting at. It can take days. It can take full days of trying to catch a Pokemon and resetting to get the correct Pokemon, the correct legendary. Days of catch the Pokemon, check it, and reset the game. It's not just money for older games. It's the time to grind, right? And I really want to emphasize that because that's key to what we're talking about.
Okay, so all of this basically sums up to, if you want to play competitive Pokemon at the highest level, there's a lot of grinding involved and possibly grinding across multiple games to get to the point where you can field a team.
Correct.
Which is interesting. And I want to come back to that because this is very different than a lot of other games.
Correct. And very importantly, none of the skills in getting the team directly influence how well you will pilot the team.
Right. That's a whole different, like, yeah. Hunting Pokemon is a different skill set than playing. It's actually very similar in Magic the Gathering to being a good deck crafter does not mean you're a good tournament player.
Yes, that is correct. Right. And so that's where we're at. That's what it takes to put together a competitive Pokemon team. All right. So now let's talk about the scandal. So in Worlds 2023 in Japan.
And for anybody watching later, right now it is 2023. We are talking to you in November of 2023. So this is a pretty recent
October,
thing.
Jeff?
October, thank you.
October. Time is
Halloween is next week. Yeah.
So they announced that they were going to do more strict hack checking. So Pokemon.
Wait, hacking?
Pokemon is fundamentally a computer game. So, which means you can tell the computer game that you have a Pokemon that happens to be perfect.
Because wait, this is on a Switch. It's not like they're cloud saving everything.
There are some elements that are cloud saved, but there are ways that you can inject a Pokemon who is, and I really need to stress this, completely identical to the one you spent days grinding for, with a couple under the hood exceptions. But in gameplay terms, they're identical. There's no competitive advantage gained. You're just reclaiming the time to grind the team.
So wait, is this equivalently like proxying a card in Magic where you're making a photocopy of your friend's so-and-so card to play? It's the exact same thing. You're just shortcutting yourself to getting it.
Yeah, that's correct.
Okay.
Right? Okay, so they announced in Japan that they would be hack checking everyone's Pokemon in a more stringent way than normal. So it used to be, is this Pokemon a legal version of this Pokemon? Could you theoretically have gotten this Pokemon in the wild or in whatever way? And if yes, it passes. This time they did a checksum check. There's a code underneath everything that tells you a little bit more about how the Pokemon was generated. And most Pokemon that are hacked in don't have that code. It can be spoofed before anyone in the comments is like, you can totally make a perfect hack. Yeah, sure. Great. Yep. 100%. But that wasn't done.
I'm assuming harder to do or never felt necessary before this. Okay.
Both true. And a significant portion of the field was disqualified on the basis that they brought hacked Pokemon. And this is sort of
because if you're playing pro Pokemon, you're probably not as interested in, you may not be interested in the grindy part. You might be interested in the playing part.
Yes, that's correct.
Oh
because
boy,
again,
I can see that this must have thrown the field. When did they announce this? Like
at the event, they announced they announced the hack checks
after people had traveled there.
Yeah, they announced the hack checks like the night before or the day before, very close to when people had already committed, and then they had gone through and disqualified a bunch of people, some of them in the middle of the tournament. Some people made it into the tournament and several rounds in were hack checked and disqualified. And to get back to that whole trading thing, there are a bunch of cases, at least one in particular, where someone had been trading forward a beloved Pokemon that they had gotten from one of their best friends as a child. And that they'd never had any reason to suspect that Pokemon was hacked. Turns out it was, and they were disqualified. And because they had like brought this forward as an element of their team from their childhood, they were like emotionally devastated because they had like, this was a thing that they had grown up with, and it turns out that it was like all fake, and they're like quitting competitive Pokemon forever. So like, it's not a small deal, right? It's not like, oh, I got DQ'd.
It's the gifted Black Lotus that you've been keeping in your sleeve for 20 years and then find out it's a fake.
Yeah, exactly. 100%. So it caused all of this controversy. And
that's awful.
Yeah. Oh, it's super awful, right? Because people had paid to go to Japan. People like, this isn't for American players. This isn't like, oh, you flew to St. Louis or San Diego or Baltimore or wherever to do. This is, you got an international flight to Japan and then got
hotels and
right, and then got disqualified. right? Which, by the way, everyone knows about because people are tracking this tournament, right? Like, it's not like you got disqualified in a dark black room and like, okay, cool, great, I'm going to go enjoy the rest of this. This is like a thing that the world of Pokemon is paying attention to, and you got DQ'd, right? So it's a big deal. So there's this, so that's the controversy. So,
wow.
Right. So
this is a lot more interesting than I actually thought it was going to be initially. Like,
right?
That's some real rug pull.
Right. Yeah, it's a huge rug pull.
Quick clarifying questions. Every year before, they had never done anything like this.
They had done something at a lower level, right? There was a, but I think the number of disqualifications historically has been incredibly low. Like, you'd have to have someone who was actually cheating versus hacking. So, quick clarifying question. Cheating is gaining a competitive advantage in the match. This Pikachu is faster
Bringing a Pikachu that's better than any Pikachu should be.
Right. This Pikachu is faster than... This is a 101st percentile Pikachu. That's impossible. You can't do that, right?
Don't you mean that's shocking?
Right? Versus, this is just a Pikachu. I'm using it as part of the team, right? You didn't sneak an extra pawn onto your chessboard, right?
Yeah. Actually, going back to the proxying thing, it's, here's my proxy, that is, I've circumvented the grinding, but it is the exact same card versus secretly like changing it from a 4 mana cost to a 3 mana cost by like knocking off a skull or, up in its defense from a 2 to a 3, where it is just a strictly better version of a card.
That's correct.
Okay. So no competitive advantage, but circumventing the gathering portion of the game.
Correct. And there's the controversy is not merely that these players got disqualified. It's that competitive Pokemon is now in this very weird spot where it feels like, and this is where I really want to jump into this conversation with you, Geoff, is it feels like there's different expectations. It feels like the player's expectation for the people who actually want to go into the competitive field and compete in a multi-day tournament on location with a bunch of people is different than what the rules are set up to support. Because
I think I actually know why. Like,
okay.
So this may not be, it wasn't like when Will and I talked about this a little bit, I just did a little bit of thinking on my side, and there's something that has almost become ingrained into, let's say, a genre or subgenre level, which is how competitive games work and the audience expects them. And what I think this really is a mismatch of what Nintendo thinks their game is versus what the community thinks the game is.
Yes.
So like, say we're going to go play a competitive fighting game, Will. We're going to go play Street Fighter.
Sure.
Or say we're going to go play a competitive RTS like StarCraft.
Sure.
They give you everything.
Right.
When you go play Street Fighter, you have all of the champions unlocked. And they're all exactly the same. If you play Ryu, Ryu is Ryu.
Right. Your Ryu and my Ryu and chat's Ryu and yours at home, all identical.
Right. If I'm playing StarCraft 2 and doing a Zealot Rush, everybody knows the exact strength of a Zealot. Yes. They are nigh well identical. I don't have to go unlock them. I don't have to grind. You just get in everything.
Right.
So certain genres, fighting games, RTS games, we will give you everything for competitive play. Like, you might have to earn them in the story, but if you're going to go play competitive, everything's unlocked.
Right.
Kind of the next level down would be MOBAs. You get everything, but by the play time that you're ready to be competitive. So, for example, if you go play League of Legends, years ago, they got rid of all of the rune pages you'd have to buy. They gave it to you.
Right.
If you go play in a competitive account at a tournament, they will unlock every single champion for you. In fact, they'll unlock most of the skins for you. If you go play competitive League, if you go play, I'm assuming competitive Dota, this isn't, I have to go grind for, all of these things. I don't have to go buy things. Competitive scene, here's an unlock of everything.
Yeah.
Go have fun. And if you're playing just competitively, not like in a tournament, for League of Legends, by the time you're level 30, which is the first time you can play ranked games, you have most of the champion pool. Any champions you would want to play would have been unlocked by then. And you get equivalently, they got rid of the rune pages, everything else that would be a weird sub-in thing.
In those games,
just given.
In those games, it feels like the unlock path is the training wheels that help you develop the skills, right? That unlocking the elements of competitive play is part of the learning process for competitive play.
Yeah. And as Ice Fury and Chad just said, or in a MOBA, you know, every Garen is just like every other Garen.
Right. And those elements are all identical. Right? Yeah. Okay.
Next level up for that is kind of the almost everything's the same, but it's modified by, say, like player level or class level perks. So like a lot of shooters, like say Call of Duty or other ones, you kind of have a RPG progression tree, but everybody is roughly the same kind of thing. You get a certain amount of perks to slot. Actually, a lot of MOBAs are kind of like that too, where you're slotting perks.
Yep.
So actually, your Garen may be a little different from everybody else's Garen, but it's off of the perk tree.
It's within a known range.
Yes.
Yeah.
Another, like the next version up for that is you still have to collect it, but there's an easy cap to get to. So like if you go play Clash Royale, they cap their cards for tournament play at level 9.
Right.
Which you can get by the time you're kind of ready to start playing head-to-head against other players. Most likely, most of your cards are at that level. And by the time you've been playing a while, all of your cards are well past that level, and they're kind of leveled down to that so that everybody, you know, since somebody's been playing for a couple of months versus somebody who's been playing a couple of years, their cards are still the same.
Yes.
And you're at a competitive level with them. Right. And again, your cards are never more powerful. And this is one of the big things. Like every game I've just mentioned, your cards or playing pieces are never more powerful.
Right.
They're all of identical power level on there. And you get to certain other games after that where like collecting is part of the genre. Like if you're going to go play Magic or Hearthstone, you don't start out with the entire set, but that's so built into the expectation of how you play that that's just part of what players think of as the genre. So they're willing to accept, I don't have the cards for this deck because that's just the way the genre works. And even then, most of those games will be like, we cap at, say, 4 cards per deck in Magic, meaning that you don't have to worry about getting 20 of a particularly powerful card. You can kind of hit your 4 and say, cool, I have enough. I can now field enough of these in every single deck. Right. Or it's ultra powerful and capped at 1 as a legendary. Yeah. And, you know, there's a couple things after that, like
MMOs.
There's MMOs for raids have a grinding aspect to them, where you basically have to grind your way up to the point where you can go on to the raid. And that actually feels a little bit like what this is.
Right. And so let's finish out the thing, and then I'll tell you where I think Pokemon is and where I think fans think it is.
Right. And like I threw in one other example, which is the expect to pay a fortune. Like if you're going to go play competitive Warhammer 40K, right, or even not even competitive, like if you're just going to go play with some friends, you have to go buy, assemble, and paint. Well, you don't have to paint if you don't want to. Buy and assemble an army to go play. And for some reason, that feels different than Magic. Like, you probably spend more money on Magic, but for some reason, who knows?
Yeah, who
Warhammer
knows?
Feels like you're going to be paying.
I think Warhammer is oddly the combination of the previous two steps. It's you have to buy, there's a monetary investment, and then there's a grind time investment. The monetary investment is I have to buy all this stuff like Magic cards, and then the grind time investment like MMOs is I have to build and paint all of this stuff. So it feels like a summation of the previous two levels. Yeah. But
if you want to do tinkering, like wait, I want to sub this squad for this squad, that means you have to buy and build even more.
Paint. Yeah, or you could just magnetize everything. Anyway, okay, so you made a really good observation, which is that competitive Pokemon in the style which is laid out by the game and by the like non-hacked framework, right? By the vanilla framework, feels a lot more like world first MMO racing than some of these other ones, right? And world first MMO racing is generally regarded as pretty hardcore. Like you have support teams, you have people who help analyze. At this point for WoW, I know there are people like every raid team includes a programmer to help them understand how to build add-ons for fights. Like it's very hardcore, and the in-game grind to maintain item level, class power, level up, have all of the right builds available.
I mean, just
everything, food, pots, whatever. It is quite significant. And that feels like it's an appropriate comparison to what the game is designed to be.
And the reason I find like when you said it feels more like a turn-based MOBA, that's like where a huge red flag went off to me, because players expect in a MOBA that all of the champions, actually, let me even bring this back. If you're going to go play a esports game, one of the fundamental underlying things on, I would say 95% plus, I'm sure there's exceptions, 95% plus of esports games, is that everybody starts at the same level, and it's the player's skill.
Yes.
It isn't player possesses more of a certain thing. It's the player's skill that's supposed to matter, not I was able to buy more expensive cards.
Right.
Or field a more expensive thing.
Right. I was able to, and in the case of Pokemon, what the expectation, because I traded for this Pokemon with my friend from childhood, does not excuse you getting DQ'd, right? So that means that the only way to be sure is to obtain all of the Pokemon you intend to use competitively yourself. The advantage isn't necessarily strictly money, it's money and time, right?
They should actually, if they're really going to enforce this, they almost need to put out a tool where you can check your deck beforehand and get told which ones don't work.
That's correct, because currently the only way to determine whether a Pokemon has been hacked in is to use the tool that hacks them in. That's the only way to check. There is no official way to check and see if the Pokemon you traded for is legitimate or not. It's to use the exact same tool that generates hacked Pokemon.
And even then, though,
which... wild,
yeah,
right?
But it's so interesting. Like Nintendo, you can see, or again, using Nintendo as a shorthand for the block of companies controlling this.
Yeah,
very much has the thought of you're going to go grind for all of the, that catching the Pokemon is an essential part of their competitive play. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the players are saying no. For us, the part of competitive play is the competitive play, yes, not the prep for it.
Right.
And there's a disconnect there, which is, I assume, why they're hacking it in at the beginning. Mm-hmm. They're like, I don't want to go spend months and months of real time grinding to get the perfect deck or to be able to field, multiple different things. I want to be able to get that and go play the game.
Right.
And that is very much a disconnect between how the company thinks it should be played versus how the community is actually wanting to play it.
Right, because the community is preparing like this is a CCG, or more like a CCG, right? Very, very similar to Magic, right? The community is prepping that. Decks are theory crafted by groups of people, sometimes theory crafting houses with pro players who get together and say, we think that this is the 75 cards, 60, 15 sideboard, that we think represents the best of this deck archetype. And now we're going to acquire all of the parts and just slot them in because we've built the theory crafting, right?
Right. Practice playing it sometimes, get good with that deck.
Right.
And they build it and then they go play. They don't have to go out there and spend lots of time hunting through individual shops to find the cards because the cards are available.
Right. They're not opening all of the booster packs because the secondary market exists. They're not sitting there ripping open cases of Magic cards looking for 4 copies of the One Ring or Orcish Bowmasters or Fury or Grief or whatever they need, right? And that difference is very, very keen because to put it in this, the Pokemon Company and Nintendo and Game Freak and everyone in the competitive scene expects that you will have done the equivalent of ripping open all of the booster packs to get all of the elements that you need, regardless of how long that takes or how much it costs to get that competitive element, which feels like the real source of the disconnect, right?
Yeah. And that is a fundamental disconnect of... Right. And actually, bringing in, it's a little bit of like my background as an MMO designer. One of the things that I think was really hard for a lot of the MMO early teams, ours included, was realizing that, we set up the game with certain expectations about how players would play, but there was emergent behavior.
Yes.
There were things that the players realized and started playing in ways they wanted to play. And then it was the question for the team of, do we embrace that and double down and make that more interesting? Or do we say, no, you're playing our game wrong?
Right.
And you can, as a game designer and game team, say you are playing our game wrong if you want to. And sometimes that may be the right choice. But I would say a vast majority of the time, if players are playing your game and finding a way that they think it's more fun, that you're probably better off supporting them as opposed to, especially in this case, slapping the banhammer. But I want to say, like, from a supporting your community perspective, doing it there, once people are in Japan the night before, without having announced, like if they'd announced a month beforehand, we're going to be running this check. Here's a tool to make sure everything you have is legal. At least then nobody would have been surprised.
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is an awful lot of bad will.
And I'm an expert in bad will. Okay, so let's theorycraft for a second, because I don't want to just point at a scandal and point at a problem with competitive Pokemon and then just like, and this is it, right? I want to spend just a couple minutes on what do we think could be done? Because you said if players have emergent behavior, have a new style of playing the game, that should be supported. So let's stipulate for a quick second for chat here on Twitch and for the comments below. Let's assume that Nintendo wants to do that just for a moment. They don't. They've made it very clear that they don't. But if they did, if they changed their mind, if they had an Ebenezer Scrooge and were visited by the ghosts of Pokemon past and reminded the true meaning of competitive play, and they
Which
changed...
Pokemon would that be?
Pikachu, Butterfree probably, and Charizard most likely. Just like in a battle stack. If they did want to do that, what could they do? How could they support this style of play in a way that reconciled this disconnect between players prepping like it's a CCG and the Pokemon Company thinking that they should prep like it's an MMO?
So there's a couple. It could be show up at the tournament, kind of like if this is an actual world championship, which it is, it could be like Riot does theirs. Players show up, they get given accounts for the tournament. Those accounts have everything unlocked.
Right.
Like, that would be a start. Hey, we're not messing with your personal thing. You still got to go do all those. And at that point, theoretically, you could hack in your own stuff to practice if that was a thing you wanted to do. But like, show up, everything's unlocked. That would basically turn it into a completely level playing field of who can then build, field, and play the best deck.
Right. And
or team or whatever they call them.
And to clarify, there is a way that they could do that for Pokemon, that you would just need to have a special competitive only client that let you set EV's, IV's nature and Terra type. We didn't mention Terra type because that's way too much, chat. We're not going to get into it. But where you could set all of those otherwise random grinded elements, right? You could
or
set
they just said, this is the tournament version. Like in the same way to what Clash Royale does. They say, you get a card in a tournament, the card is a level 9.
Sure.
Like they could just say, this is tournament version of Pokemon or of Pikachu. This is tournament version of Charizard. Like so things they could do.
Right.
They could unlock everything and let you set the things. They could just say, this is tournament version. And then honestly, you could take whatever deck you had and it would turn them into tournament version when you played. In other words, you then wouldn't have to grind for the sets of all these rare things. You just have to show up with a Pikachu to get a Pikachu.
Right. Okay.
So those are options. They could, again, just kind of looking through on things, they could just say, fine, proxies are fine for World Championship. But to me, like if the Pokemon Company wants, and Nintendo and everything, wants to keep you're really supposed to go earn all of these things. I mean, what I would say is either a Pikachu's a Pikachu for, when you come in, or here is the tournament unlocked client that you play on just for this tournament. I mean, you lose a little bit of you're bringing in your Pokemon, that you've traveled with and trained with, but it's a little tricky. If you're running a competitive game, part of the rules of most competitive games are players start with an even playing field. And in this case, very specifically, they're making it extraordinarily hard to come in on an even playing field.
Yeah, I agree. I think there is one more thing which is very anti-Nintendo, which is why I hesitate to mention it. But I think this might be a way that would help ease the like if there is to be a transition. And again, we're assuming there's going to be one. There probably won't, but if there was in our magical Christmas land, improving communication, I think, is a key thing, right? We've said it before for a lot of other community-focused issues and a lot of different games and a lot of different genres and a lot of different everything. Communicating well with your players is one of the key things that helps companies avoid bad will moments, right? The whole idea of communicating well with your players and setting what you believe the expectations are clearly and in advance helps smooth over a lot of this, right? If they were like, hey, if they were like 6 months out, hey, this year's World, we've been noticing in the past that there's been a problem with lots of hacked Pokemon. We would like this World to have no hacked Pokemon. Therefore, this is the tool that you can use, and it won't tell you how or why or whatever. It just gives you an up check or a down check.
Yes, no, yeah.
Right? And the downside to that, of course, is that it lets people practice to fool it. But at that point, like it's never going to be possible to perfectly check every Pokemon. It's just not. It's just code.
I mean, at that point, what I would probably say is say, this is to the best of our ability, the way we can detect them. We will continue to develop ways to check for hacked Pokemon.
Yeah.
We will not be releasing that in the, they could even say, this gets everything up to now. We're telling you what we don't want.
Right.
If you try and find ways to, bring in additional stuff in the future, we may have better tools to detect them.
Right.
At that point, basically setting up it may be so dangerous to do this. Here's your warning. Here's what lets you check for the existing,
Yeah.
They don't have to be perfect. They have to be good enough to let people confidently feel decks and know that if they're going to try and do this, that they're risking it.
Yep. I totally agree. And I think with that, that's everything we've got for this. What do you think? Comments? Is this a thing that you had heard about? Is this a thing you're interested in? What do you think is the core issue between Nintendo / the Pokemon Company / Game Freak and their player base? And how do you think this shakes out in the long run? Is this the end of competitive Pokemon as we know it? Is this the beginning of a bright new age?
It's the end of the Pokemon as we know it, and Will feels fine.
I do. I'm a little sad. Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Design Club.
Come join us on Twitch every Thursday at 11 a.m. Pacific, 2 p.m. Eastern.
Yes, Geoff got it. Oh, I'm so happy.
Boom.
Perfect. Excellent. Well done. All right. And with that, I think we're done here. Say bye to the people, Geoff.
Bye to the people, Geoff. Have a good week, everybody.
Bye, everybody.